Just a minute. Well, dear friends, today we have Professor Syed Hafizur Rahman with us. He is going to deliver this lecture on climate change and migration. He is a full professor at the University of Jahangirnagar, Bangladesh. He received his PhD from the School of Geography, Earth Sciences and Environmental Sciences from UK, University of Birmingham in UK. He has also worked with the University of Sussex under Commonwealth Fellowship Program. So, other than the academics, he used to be a consultant dealing with the environmental impact assessment, social impact assessment. In his credit, he is having more than 100 various publications. So, with his knowledge and with his experience, today he is going to benefit us with this topic. So, lastly, I should say that he is very pleasant and he is very renowned professor, and always, whenever we request him to deliver a lecture, either in the Summerfield School or here through this platform, so he is always ready. Now, without spending any much time, I hand over the platform forum to him. So he will continue now. Thank you. Professor Syed Hafizur Rahman, please take over.
Thank you very much, Professor Hazrat. I think I'm audible to everyone.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, thank you again for introducing me to the global audience. Actually, I gave a lecture yesterday on climate change and my mountain livelihoods. Today, I am going to giving lecture on climate change and migration issues globally. And with global part, I will include a case study of Bangladesh. So this is the outline. I divided my lecture into 4 parts. First part, I will introduce migration, different types of migration and causes and consequence. Then I will talk a few slides on climate change and the causes of climate change and their impacts. In the next few slides, I will correlate between the climate change impacts on migration, how migrations happen due to climate change. And finally, most of my lecture will be on the case study of Bangladesh, the migrations issues and the problems and related solutions, as I suggested from my published articles. Okay, so first let us introduce the migration. What is migration? According to Cambridge University, the movement of a person or people from one country, locality, place of residence to settle in another is an instance of migration. So migration is a key livelihood strategy driven by multiple factors such as the socioeconomic changes, increasing climate variability and disaster incidents, and changing aspirations. A displacement denotes a more involuntary movement in reaction to climatic or non-climatic factors. According to Britannica, migration, the permanent change of residence by an individual or group, it excludes some such movement as nomadism, means the people live in the mountain region or some reason for pasturing, a migrant labor, which happening now all over the world, commuting and tourism. So these are excluded from migration issues. So there are basic difference. We can categorize the situation of mobility or migration into two variables. Forced, this is when a person has no other choice but to leave their place and move elsewhere. We can call it forced migration and non-forced migration. In this situation, people are not as vulnerable as the forced displacement, but they move of their will. According to force and non-force variables, there can be three kinds of migrants. These are refugee-like situations, then environmental driven displacements, and migrant-like situation. So first two, we said it as displacement, and the migration is the fourth one, we can call it migration. Let us define few areas. What is migrants, and there's a difference between migrants and refugee. Migrants might be defined by foreign birth, foreign citizenship, or their movement into a new country to stay temporarily or settle for a long time. And a refugee is someone who has left their home and does not have a new home to go. Often refugees do not carry many professions with them and do not have a clear idea of where they may finally settle. We can see in Bangladesh, we have some refugees during our independence, 1971. Now we have some refugees, Rohingya refugees in our country from Myanmar. So they are not migrant, they are refugees. Another term we use, environmental migration, the migration that takes place mainly due to environmental causes. So there are three issues: environmental refugee, environmentally displaced person, and environmental migrants. Lester Brown, the founder of World Watch Institute, first coined this term, environmental refugee. But although later this term has not been used popularly, it was defined as people who have been forced to leave their traditional habitat temporarily or permanently because of marked environmental disruption. Natural and triggered people are called environmental refugee. Later on, IOM, International Organization for Migration, used the term environmentally displaced person. And they defined the person who are displaced within their country or habitual residence, or who have crossed an international border and for whom environmental deterioration or destruction is a significant cause of their displacement, although not necessarily the sole one. And finally, environmental migrants are persons or groups of persons who predominantly for reasons of certain progressive changes in the environment that adversely affect their lives and conditions are obliged to leave their habitat home or chose to do so either temporarily or permanently. So these three terms we should know before going to the causes and the consequences, to know the consequences of migration. let us see about how many people migrate every year. In overall, the estimated number of international migrants has increased over the past 5 decades. The estimated 281 million people living in a country other than their countries of birth in 2020 was 128 million more than in 1990. The number of migration has increased about 100 million people, and over 3 times estimated the number in 1970. 1 in 3 migrants comes from Asia. The highest ratio of outward migrants is seen from hazard-exposed Pacific countries. In 2019, approximately 1,900 disasters triggered in 24.9 million new displacements across 140 countries. These are literature reference materials. In particularly, the countries affected are Bangladesh, Tajikistan, and Russia see significant disaster-associated displacements. The disasters, heavy rain-induced flooding in Katlan, Tajikistan, triggered 5,400 new displacements. Landslides in Jalalabad, Tajikistan show 4,700 new displacements, while floods in Altai, Tavu, and Khakassia in Russia displaced around 1,500 people. Iran reported the highest sub-regional figures with more than 520,000 new disaster-related displacements in 2019. In Southeast and South Asia, cyclones, floods, typhoons triggered internal displacement of 9.6 million people in 2019, almost 10% of total global displacement. With most migrants in the region being temporarily migrant workers, the loss of job among them have been particularly severe due to the adverse economic climate triggered by COVID-19 situation. It has also resulted in large-scale returns of migrant workers, and remittance have declined drastically. The COVID-19 pandemic has had significant impact on migrants. In the region of some countries have targeted migrants in economic stimulus package or income support programs. However, access to such support has been heterogeneous. We also know the situation of Sri Lanka, where the economic conditions are the main economic source of migrants from the migrant peoples are not coming the money, and they are suffering a huge loss. Okay. Next up, what are the major causes of migration? People migrate for many different reasons. These reasons can be classified as economic, social, political, or environmental. Economic migrations happen to moving to find work or follow a particular career path. Social migration happens moving somewhere for better quality of life or to be closer to a family or friends. Political migration forcing to escape political persecution or war, what's happening at the moment now in the world. So environmental causes of migration include natural disasters, flooding may be happened, and due to safety reasons, sometimes migrations also happened. We can divide the migration causes into 2 parts: push factors and pull factors. Push factors are the reason why people leave an area. They include lack of services, lack of safety, high crime, crop failure, drought, flooding, war, and the pull factors are those reasons why people move to a particular area. They include higher employment, more wealth, better services, good climate, safer, less crime, uh, political stability, the places where more fertile land, lower risk from natural hazards. These are the pull factors which encourage people for migration. Let us see what are the impacts of migrations. They are both uh, positive and negative impacts for migration, because migration is a becoming crucial subject of life of cities. Many opportunities and attractions, big cities pull large numbers of people to the cities. Migration can have such thus positive and negative effects. The positive effects, unemployment is reduced and people get better job opportunities while they migrate. Migrations help in improving the quality of life of people. It helps to improve people's social life as they learn about a new culture, customs, and languages, which helps to strengthening brotherhood among the people. The migration of skilled workers lead to more significant economic growth in the region. Children get better opportunities for higher education and where the population density is lower, the birth rate also decreased among the migrants in some areas, but it is not true for all the regions. Let us see some negative impacts. The loss of a person from a rural area impacts the level of output and development of the rural region. The influx of workers in urban areas increases competition for jobs, house, school facilities. Having a large population puts too much pressure on natural resources, amenities, and services. It is difficult for a villager to survive in urban areas because there is no natural environment and pure air in urban areas. They have to pay for each and everything. Migration changes the population of a place. Therefore, the distribution of population is uneven. Many migrants are wholly illiterate and uneducated. Therefore, they are not only unfit for most jobs, but also lack basic knowledge and life skills. Poverty makes them unable to live everyday and a healthy life. In poverty, children growing up have no access to proper nutrition, education, or health. Migration increased the slum areas in cities, increasing many problems such as unhygienic conditions, crime, pollution. Sometimes migrants are exploited. Migration is one of the leading causes of increasing nuclear families where children grow up without a complete family circle. These are the general issues of migrations. Uh, Now let us talk about climate change. So we know about the climate and their impacts, but because I have to correlate between the migration due to a climatic reason, I just speak about a few words on the climate change. So when we speak on climate change, so we know it's referred to long-term shifting of temperature and weather uh, um, weather patterns in the global change, but it is a natural phenomenon of our Earth. But since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of these climate change issues, primarily due to burning fossil fuels. These fossil fuels generates greenhouse gas emissions that act like a blanket warped around the Earth, which trap the sun heat and raising the temperatures. These greenhouse gas concentrations are at their highest levels in 2 million years, and emissions continue to rise. So as a result, the Earth is now about 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than that of 1980s. So what are the causes of uh, climate change? There are many causes. If we see from generating power to consuming too much are the main cause of climate change. Generating electricity and heat by burning fossil fuels cause many global emissions. Most electricity is still produced from fossil fuels. Only about a quarter comes from wind, solar, and other renewable sources. And all the manufacturing industries rely on the fossil fuels for their production, like cement, rod, steel, electronics, plastic, clothes, and other goods are produced using the fossil fuel energy. We also causes the climate change because we change the land use by cutting down forests for agriculture or other reasons. So these are also imbalance the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. For using transportation, most cars, lorries, what we are using greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide. So these are the other sources of climate change. And our foods are produced, require energy to run farm equipment or fishing boats, usually fossil fuel. Growing crops can also cause emissions, like when using fertilizers and manure. Power building, globally residential and commercial buildings consume over half of the electricity. As they continue to draw on coal, oil, or natural gases for heating and cooling, they emit significant greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, how we live in our home and use of power, moving around, what we eat, and how much we throw away, all that contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. So does the consumption of clothing, electronics, plastics contribute in climate change? So when we speak of climate change impacts, we are referring to those phenomena that occurs as a result of rising temperatures and shifting precipitation patterns. In other words, temperature and precipitation changes are the first order effects of changing climate. The second order effects are driven by these signals, such as longer growing seasons, endangered species, or human health. These, as you can see, these impacts can be either positive or negative. In fact, in some parts of the world, we expect that climate change could create some benefits in the near term, although it's uncertain how long these benefits might last. We can think about impacts as chain of caution, rising sea levels, for instance, a second order impact of increasing temperatures, and occurs primarily as a result of melting land-based glaciers and also the thermal expansion of water. These rising sea levels can then lead to migration of the low coastal community. So the coastal migration of the coastal community would be a third order effects of climate change. So in other words, climate change impacts are the damage report that results from mass combustion of fossil fuels and present monumental challenges to both human and natural systems. This figure shows the sector-wise impacts of climate change. It's on health, agriculture, forest, water resource, coastal areas, and spaces and natural areas. due to sea level rise, temperature change, and changes in precipitation impacted hugely. And these have a contribution in the third order impacts of migration. We can divide climatic events into two parts: slow onset events and sudden onset events. The slow onset event includes increasing soil and water salinity in coastal areas due to sea level rise, drought, and desertification. And certain onset events, tropical cyclone, typhoons, hurricanes, tornadoes, hydrological hazards, including coastal floods and river erosion. All these are sudden events. Now let us see who are the most vulnerable communities due to climate change. Those people who live in a sensitive ecosystem or environment are the most vulnerable to climate change impacts, such as people living in small islands, nations, coastal areas, rural islands, and other developing and underdeveloped countries, where the density of population is high, normal lifestyle is not so available. Conditions like sea level rise and saltwater intrusion have advanced to the point where whole communities have had to relocate, portrayed droughts, and are putting people at risk of famine. The number of climate refugees is expected to rise in the future due to these reasons. This is the last slide, or how is climate change affects then climate change. I will correlate with climate change and migrations. So how climate change initiates migrations, we can see here. Many people think climate change mainly means warmer temperatures only, but temperature rise is only the beginning of the story, because the Earth is a system where everything is connected. Changes in one area can influence changes in all others. The consequences of climate change now include, among others, intense droughts, water scarcity, severe fires, rising sea levels, flooding, melting polar ice, catastrophic storms, and declining biodiversity included among them. As climate change is a driver of starting the migration, it all starts from the activities that initiate the climate change in the first place. Activities that cause the temperature rise to impact the natural conditions of the environment, and these phenomena cause different environmental disasters and catastrophes. As a consequence of that ecological degradation, the productivity of the land and other fields decreases. Besides that, people who lead their life in these sectors suffer the most. As a result, they either lose their jobs, sometimes due to the environmental degradation and continuous impact of disasters, their land, house, money, or capital, which cause a tremendous economic and social crisis. At this stage of the process, other drivers also come into action. Factors like discrimination, persecution, governance and freedom, conflict and insecurity, policy incentives, direct coercion, employment opportunities, income, wage, well-being, producer prices and consumer prices create the perfect scenario of crisis, scarcity of fundamental needs like food, shelter, security, education for the vulnerable to reach a point where they decide to make the migration.
If there is a disturbance, please mute your mic. Olena, Sukhina, please mute your mic.
Hi.
Please mute your mic. Turn off your mic.
I am a scientist. I am working in Institute of Economic in Environmental.
Can anybody tell her what's the problem? She's disturbed. Hello. She's not able to understand what I'm trying to say.
I am not
Yes.
problem.
Please mute. Okay. It's all right. Okay. So we're just talking about how climate change initiates migration, the factors affected, climatic factors affect how climatic factors affect in initiating migration in any region. So next, how many people migrating every year due to climate change? We know the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugee reports that 21.5 million people were forcibly displaced each year by sudden onset weather-related hazards between 2008 and 2016, and thousands more from slow onset risks linked to climate change impacts. At the end of 2020, around 7 million people in 104 countries and territories were living in displaced due to disasters. So in short, if we can see the top 5 countries with highest number of internally displaced persons due to disasters. These countries are Afghanistan, India, Pakistan, Ethiopia, and Sudan. So there is a close link, climate change, disasters, and migration. So disasters in 2020 triggered more than 3/4 of the new internal displacements recorded worldwide. More than 98% of the 30.7 million new displacements in 2020 resulted from weather-related hazards such as storm and flood concentrated in East Asia, the Pacific, and the South Asia. 5 countries accounted for more than 60% of the new internal displacements due to disasters. These are China, the Philippines, Bangladesh, India, and the United States. This is the last slide before going to Bangladesh case study. So we all know about how and who are most vulnerable to the migration process or any climatic or disaster events. Mostly women, among women, pregnant women, children, older people, physically disturbed people, and ethnic groups, and the minorities are the most vulnerable to any kinds of migration process. So with this slide, I conclude the migration general topics, and now I discuss the Bangladesh case study. In Bangladesh case study, I have 7 articles published in journals on Bangladesh migration issues. First one ensuring about the rights of climate displaced people in Bangladesh. Me and with my PhD student, we work on the coastal area of Bangladesh. Their sustainable adaptation mostly we looked at, and with the sustainable adaptation, we looked at the displacement and migration issues and published a number of papers on these issues. So the sustainable adaptation we proposed to resolve the climate displacement issues in southeastern islands in one paper, and we worked on the environmental catastrophe done by the Rohingya influx in Bangladesh. We have studied that one, and some we suggest community-based rehabilitation solution for climate displaced crisis. I will go through all the paper and findings of all the papers, not all the papers, after describing general Bangladesh introduction. In the, I also worked on the river erosion and the livelihood issues of the riverbank people and how they migrate from seasonally migrate from one place to another due to river erosion. And we have reviewed a coastal erosion displacement and resettlement strategies of South Asian countries in a paper, and livelihood vulnerability and changing pattern of livelihood climate in the coastal areas. We published these 7 papers, and these 2 book chapters was published in 2019 and 2021. One is generally in German and French language from Caritas, Switzerland, which is example migration. We link climate change and migration, and Bangladesh example we used in that book chapter. And this was published in the Handbook of Climate Change Management, where we proposed our solutions of climate displacement in Bangladesh. So let us go from the Bangladesh. You can see Bangladesh located in between Myanmar and India, and Bhutan is top position. On one side is the Himalaya, and north side is Himalaya, and south side is Bay of Bengal here. So Bangladesh has an area of about 150 square kilometer. It's a very small country in considering other countries like India. It is around 150. Bangladesh is equivalent to India and probably or more maybe. But it is the home of approximately 145 million people. The country is situated in the tropics of South Asia, as I said, at the interface between 2 different environments, Himalaya in the north and Bay of Bengal in the south. Life-giving monsoons and the catastrophic revenge of natural disaster characterize this country. About 10% of Bangladesh is barely 1 meter above the mean sea level, and 1/3 is affected by tides. More than 50 million people are affected by disaster events every 5 years. The country long coastline faces one cyclone roughly every 3 years. Annually, approximately 1/4 of the country is inundated, while in 1998 flood inundated up to 61% of the country, rendering 45 million people homeless. People living in the coastal area are particularly vulnerable. Climate change is already affecting Bangladesh. Average temperature increased about 1 degree Celsius in May and around 0.5 degrees Celsius in November. Annual mean rainfall is also increasing. The intensity of cyclone originating from the Bay of Bengal has increased, and the declining precipitation droughts have dried up wetlands and severely degraded ecosystems. Salt water from the Bay of Bengal has penetrated around 100 kilometers or more inland along tributary channels during dry seasons. There's another effect due to there is a dam in India we call Farakka Dam that has influence as well for the sea saltwater intrusion issues. Bangladesh will likely face more frequent, more intensive scale and intensified floods, cyclones, and droughts. Sea level could inundate around 17% of the coastal land unless appropriate action has been taken. We have taken many actions in this regard. Bangladesh is working on that. So now let us see the impacts. Climate change affects Bangladesh 2 ways. First, the changing temperature and precipitation pattern threaten agriculture and food security. Secondly, increase in climate-induced disasters such as flood, droughts, saline water intrusion, riverbank uh, erosion are affected. Sudden onset disasters such as these things happened, and in the low-lying coastal districts are frequently affected. This is also, you can see, this is also the first outcome of one of my paper, where we the hazards are identified, cyclone and erosion, and linked it with the livelihood and climate change disasters. So from this network diagram, we can see the asset damage, income loss, and migration is happened due to this all hazardous situation due to. So as we know, the poor will be the most affected in every case, especially women, children, and disabled people. This impact will likely intensify and thus continue to disrupt Bangladesh efforts to achieve economic growth and eradicate poverty. Responding to a disaster has already diverted significant parts of the development path. But concern that climate change will affect human rights, such as the right to life, food, adequate living standards, and physical and mental health is growing. People are experiencing changes in duration of disaster events and new type of disasters. In Bangladesh, we experiencing central river basin floodplain areas are increasingly prone to slow onset disaster like drought and dense fog, while other major rivers floodplains are prone to monsoon flooding and erosion. People living in coastal districts are experiencing regular floods with high tides, especially the new full moon periods. In addition to drought, the northwest region is experiencing dense fog, floods, and erratic rainfall. So how many people migrate from Bangladesh due to climate change? It is really, the number is really uncertain number, but from the literature from 1988 to 2012, Bangladesh experienced 6 severe floods with and displacing as many as 45 and 30 million people are recorded. According to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, nearly 700,000 Bangladeshis have been displaced annually by natural disasters over the last decade. This number will spikes more in years when catastrophic cyclones effects in Bangladesh, and number could be increased. In reality, why they are migrating, in one of our paper, we investigate this, and in reality, the causes, consequence, and type of migrations are highly dependent on social and ecological context to and from which people move. There are 5 categories that drive migration: social, political, economic, environmental, and demographic. These 5 drivers might interact or overlap in different ways in different places. Of these 5 categories, climate change is generally understood to primarily influence the environmental drivers of migration. It will, however, also influence the economic driver by affecting employment opportunity, income ways, and well-being. In one of our paper, we conceptually given the conceptual framework for climate change migration in Bangladesh. So we identified two major areas, coastal area and river basin area. And due to climate change, livelihoods are affected. And how these coastal area, we have three types of problems: salinity intrusion, storm surge, and polder failure. Due to these three reasons, some displacement and migration happens, which are again three types: seasonal, provisional, and permanent. So seasonal migration is a common issue in Bangladesh, probably in the world, where during a season, people migrate to cities, and when harvesting period, they come back to their locations. So what are the consequences of migration due to climate change? There are both negative and positive consequences we have. First of all, negative consequences of women become socially and economically vulnerable when the leading male household member migrates from home. The context and the scale of vulnerability vary according to geographical location, governance structure, power relations, and access to services. But this study, our study found that vulnerable young women are more vulnerable. Young women are most vulnerable in that case. Men from rural areas often migrate to urban areas to find work for a few weeks during lean periods. This season migrates is widespread in south, in northwestern two districts of Bangladesh. So women are left in the sole family caretakers and are burdened with more work, including securing food for the family while the man is absent. And if we see the positive consequences, in some instances, migration can be economically beneficial to a country and to be considered potential adaptation options for individuals. Analysis by the Bangladesh Bank, for example, shows the foreign remittance and ready-made garments are the two highest earning foreign currency sectors in Bangladesh, and also the two most significant contributors to country's annual budget. Interestingly, these two sectors rely significantly on migrants workers from areas badly affected by or prone to disasters. The ready-made garments industry, for example, employs over 4 million workers, about 70% whom are migrant women. Can you hear me?
Yes, there was interruption. Yes, your voice was not coming. Now I can hear you.
Should I go back to few slides or continue from this slide?
I think only this last slide was consequences of migration due to climate change, where you were describing this textile industry and the
Okay.
about few million people, 3 million people engaged in that.
Okay, I think that was the last sentence I said on this slide. So Bangladesh has some positive consequence, I said mentioned, because of remittance and the garment sectors, and the foreign remittance are the mostly coming from the migrants. That's the issue. In the next slide here, I show here I show you can see the future prediction on the for drought migrants and flood migrants and cyclone migrants in Bangladesh in 2040. And in this figure, you can see the projected migrants for major climate-induced disasters and river bank erosion. These are just statistical data. I think I don't need to explain, but about the future projected migration, I say a few words from the literature. Regional variation is significant across Asia, by one estimate in South Asia, internal climate migrants, that is those migrating due to climate change and associated impacts such as water scarcity, crop failure, sea level rise, and storm surge are projected to be 40 million by 2050.
Your slides are not visible. Your slides are not visible. Can you share the screen again?
Is it visible now?
Yes, it is. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I just mentioned some figures about the projected migration globally. So okay, I think you can see my slide here. This is the outcome of one of our paper. You can see my slides hopefully. So where we just analyze the livelihood cycle of climate displaced people and can you see my screen?
Yes, it is okay. Now you please go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, it is fine.
Okay. We just analyzed the livelihood cycle of climate displaced people and proposed a thematic concepts of community-based rehabilitation program. You can see a statistic cycle of land access, food security, and poverty. Loss of land due to cyclone, tidal surge, and coastal erosion become a long-term problem in Bangladesh. This work has been done in the one coastal islands in Bangladesh. And from that study, we found that due to some land loss happened due to some disaster in area, and from land loss, low income, and poor health condition. This is a cyclically happened for, and people relocated their positions for their livelihoods. To overcome this problem, we just proposed community-based rehabilitation program. A thematic concept has been developed. How can they do that? And some of the NGOs are now following these concepts in the rural area of Bangladesh in some areas. I'm very close to the end of my lecture. Um, in one paper, we have suggested about the policy, how we can modify our policies to cope and acknowledge the internal displaced people's rights. So we proposed a holistic management approach, which will help. We find this from the disaster like Cyclone Aila. After Aila, we have worked on the coastal in the coastal areas and developed this one. So if the management approach should be holistic and it should be community-based intervention. So this intervention should be bottom-up approach we should use. And from the government level, a community-led post-disaster recovery policy should be there, which might boost up the livelihood opportunities of the local communities and which will help the decrease the rate of displacement or migration from the disaster-prone areas. So this is my last slide, where we have discussed about the climate change, that it is a vital reason for mass human displacement all over the earth over the last few decades, and climate displaced people are putting major challenges to the geophysical, biological, and social arrangements. In this lecture, I have tried to draw an all over picture of the migration, the contribution of climate change behind it, and the process of how climate change events induce migration and displacement. Besides, I also tried to cover the scenario of migration and displacements due to the climate change in Bangladesh. In this situation, our study have been done on the topic had described the advancement of sustainable management of climate change induced displacement people by good governance through ensuring strong and continuous coordination among the relevant stakeholders, ensuring civilian rights for displaced people, ensuring safe and risk-free relocation and rehabilitation places, strengthening climate change adaptation and disaster management related laws, rules and policy, ensuring community-based resettlement program, and ensure the accountability, transparency, and equity during the government-owned land distribution for displaced people. With this, I like to conclude my lecture. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. Azut, can you hear me?
I hear you, but you please stop sharing the screen. Close these slides.
Okay.
Yes, right. Thank you. So we open the forum for the questions. If any question, any kind of intervention, the audience want to make, please come forward. Yes. Okay, so thank you, Professor, for this wonderful lecture, wonderful knowledge you have provided about the migration issues happening as a result of climate change effects in Bangladesh. Um, in my understanding, to my anybody wants to say something?
331, так?
Да.
516 разом.
Я даю. Я додаю.
516
даю.
і кульок. 520 гривень. Що вісім?
Чи купуйте він?
А по чому це?
Берем
Показуйте, що,
Я
бо
знаю, що я дома.
120, 110 і 100.
Hear the full voice. Who's buying it?
Тепер я зараз
Гроші,
собі
21 гривень по кульок.
Це на українській мета 35, а он є такі користують. Отакої мені міри, треба не можна
Dog is still there. Okay, great. So they become the participants. Good. So what I was trying to say that to my understanding, the Bangladesh is the hotspot for literally all kinds of the disasters, I think. The geographical location of this country is like that all either it is a cyclone or it is kind of hurricane or it's kind of even the tsunami which had happened long ago. It had the effect in the Bangladesh too. And usually the climate change, it is the country I have been hearing this for last 30 years. Since 30 years when I was studying in masters, I have been reading the effect of the climate change, particularly the sea rise. As a result of the climate change, the Bangladesh will be the first casualty, and it is now we see with our eyes that this is the first casualty, first country affected by the sea level rise. Yes. So we all understand about it, how the carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere and then ultimately leading to the melting of glaciers and then sea rise happens. Because of the sea rise, I think by now, as you have also said somewhere in your lecture, about 61% of the country was affected by sea level rise or some other events.
Yeah, if 1 meter sea level rise happens.
Okay. So it's already 1 meter already there, or it is less. I don't know. Okay. So more or less, so we should say that half of the country is already affected by these things. So once these calamities happen because of this, all these phenomena, so obviously the the peoples are affected. Their life is deserted. Their life is they are uprooted because of all these phenomena. They are bound to leave their homes. So they internally migrate, and then also to other neighboring countries they go. Sometimes they go to Indian territories, although India is very hostile to Bangladesh people. Mainly they come to India, or they go to somehow escape to other countries. So even Europe and North America is also receiving a phenomenal number of Bangladesh people, but they are the different kind of the migrants. They are not really affected by all these things. Maybe affected slightly, but they are mostly the educated people, or they are going for the jobs or other employments, or there are the other kind of the pull factors involved in it. But really, they are but the real people who are affected by all these things, they belong to the poor zone, poor people. They are so really suffering from that. So thank you so much. This is my understanding. So if anybody wants to make any comment or wants to say something or have a question, please speak out. Thank you, Professor. Now we close this lecture formally, and I think on 3 of June we will be meeting with Professor Hans Peter again, and on 6th June I will be on this forum speaking something. I have kept one lecture on it. So thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you very much, the audience also, for patient sharing. Thank you very much from my side.